Now this term we started with Baroque music, listening to popular composers of the time and discovering the music. So I'm going to start with this picture that you see here, and you will see how decorative this royal chapel of King Louis XIV is. So this is now the architecture. The visual art also looked like that, and what I see in the visual art, I also hear in the music of the Baroque era. Period of music is from 1600 to 1750. It is generally considered to finish sometime around the death of J.S. Bach in 1750 and Handel in 1759. Now I want you to go and listen to pieces by J.S. Bach and Handel so that you're familiar with the style of composition and the elements that I hear in Baroque music. It was a very eventful time in history. In Europe, they had the 30-year War, and that ended in 1648. They had powerful rulers such as Louis XIV in France, Charles II in England, and Peter the Great in Russia. And they reigned with considerable ruthlessness. It was also a time of great scientific discoveries, such as Galileo and Isaac Newton, and new lands were still being explored. Now, in the art world, we had Rembrandt, for instance, and Caravaggio, and they were developing new techniques in the world of art. It's not surprising that the music composed and performed at that time similarly stretched the boundaries of what had been heard up until this point. So before the Baroque, we had the Renaissance, and that was the era of a lot of singing with lute accompaniment. So everything changed in the Baroque era. Now let's look at the meaning of the word Barocco. The word Baroque means imperfect pearl, from the Portuguese word barroco, and was first used in connection with a highly ornamented style of architecture and art in the 17th century. Centuries later, when critics put a name to this extravagant time, the word Baroque was used mockingly. So that was it was actually a negative word for them, that it was not perfect. Today it is descriptive and described the period of music from the birth of opera, that's a word that you should know by now, and oratorio, that's also a term that you should know by now, to the death of J.S. Bach. I just mentioned the architecture and the features that we see in the Baroque music, we see in the architecture. Complicated shapes, breaking out of the box, extreme ornamentation, that's very important because I hear that in my music. Often gilded with gold, okay, large elliptical forms, curved lines replacing classical straight, twisted columns, grand stairways, high domes, ornate, open pediments, interest in light and shadow, so that contrast that I also find in the music, decorative sculptures, often in niches. So the architecture, try and find some pictures of Baroque architecture, and then you compare that with the ornamented style that I find in the music. So during the 1600s, we had a system that crumbled away, and that is a system of scales that we called modes. Now, you don't have to know anything about modes. You just have to know that in the Baroque era, we started with the scales as we know it today. Now, in class, we're going to write the 4 sharp scales, the 4 flat scales, and we're going to do the major and work out the minors. But before the Baroque era, we had modes. So if you look at this one, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, that was on the first tonic of C. Looks like our major scale. But look at the Dorian. It starts on D, ends on D, but I don't have an F sharp and a C sharp added. So that means that my semitones will be on different places. And that I will explain to you in class, because I know from my week's pitch and tones and semitones that you have to study, I know the difference between a whole tone and a semitone. So where I place my semitones, that will change the mode. Phrygian mode, EF, it starts with a semitone. Lydian mode, I have my first semitone here between 4 and 5. Mixolydian mode, G, A, B, C. So that looks a lot like the major scale where I have my semitone between 3 and 4. But look at the end. It doesn't look like a normal G major scale because I have a flattened F sharp, so I have a normal F. Okay, so it sounds different and we're going to play it in class. And that is the mode system that I had in the Renaissance. So it looks as if everything is just white notes. So everything that I change my first note and move on, my semitones will move. And we will play through this in class. So Baroque music, in Baroque music, I hear the major and minor scales as we know it today. Because with the modes, they added accidentals, and then the major and minor key system developed. And this system we still use today. Major scale, harmonic scale, melodic minors. And just see where the accidental is placed. Because that is also homework that you have to do. That I place my accidental exactly where I see the note. So if it's in the first space, I put my accidental in the first space. Now in the 17th century, we also saw invention of several new forms and designs, such as opera, sonata, oratorio, suite, fugue, and concerto. So for the next few weeks, we're going to concentrate on these new forms and designs. The orchestra started to take shape mainly in the strings. I usually say that the strings are the backbone of the orchestra in the Baroque time, and the violins became the dominant instrument and the most important instrument in the orchestra. Some of the old instruments disappeared, like a viol, and other sections of the orchestra were not yet finalized. Now I want you to really try and take 3 composers this week and listen to some of their works. We see Vivaldi, Scarlatti, Antonio and Domenico Scarlatti, Corelli, Monteverdi, Bach is a name that you know now, Handel is a name that you know, also Vivaldi, Couperin, Lully, Rameau and Purcell. So try and listen to some of these composers. When that we start looking at the music, we will see a very important form of Baroque. You see the maths below this line, and that we call a figured bass. So we needed a very clever player. This line, the basso continuo, was shared by the cello and the double bass, and then the harpsichord player. So the harpsichord player, you see that this is a slightly lighter in color. He had to figure out chords to put on in the music to accompany everybody. So he didn't see this line. He just saw this line and he had to add this. He had to build up the chords and he had to add this section here. Monody is a single voice line supported by an instrumental bass line upon which chords were constructed. The voice line followed the natural speech rhythms of the words. The style of writing for the voice, half singing and half reciting, became known as recitative. We're going to listen to recitatives in class. All the composers wrote down beneath the melody was a bass line to be played by a low-stringed instruments such as the cello. This was called the basso continuo. But the composer expected another continuo player on the harpsichord, organ or lute to build up chords upon the bass line. As these chords had to be improvised, the player had to be very skillful. Figures below the notes indicated which chords to play, and this is called a figured bass. So read through this quite a few times, and we will talk about this longer in class, and I will explain it more. They didn't have television, so of course their entertainment was things like opera or oratorio and shows that they could go and watch. Now, the first opera was written in 1597, and that was called Daphne, and was composed by Perry. It had choruses, that's something that you know, dances, and instrumental pieces, all done by a small orchestra. It contained music and drama. So, music drama. The first truly great opera was composed by Monteverdi, 1607, and was called Orfeo. So this is very important form that we found in the Baroque era. The music heightens the dramatic impact. The music and drama blend together well. There was a lot of instrumental, ritornello. So that is what kept the music together. So we had a lot of sections returning. Before each verse of the aria, we heard an instrumental ritornello. Opera is a drama in which all of the lines are sung to an orchestral accompaniment, or we have some lines sung or some not sung. So we have an orchestra and a cast. Singers push the story along. Arias is a song for solo voice with orchestral accompaniment, sung by characters to express their emotions, and a recitative is a vocal line that imitates speech, accompanied by basso continuo, speech-like. It can be secco or accompagnato. And libretto, the text of the opera based on Greek myths, word painting, we found. Da capo aria, A and B written out. When A is repeated, the singer needs to ornament and embellish. So this is a lot of facts that I've given you on this video. And of course, we will take our time to really know this. Good luck with listening to your work for this week.